Our film begins in South Africa in 1973, during a time when massacres of black people were occurring due to racial discrimination in the country. Half of the population was suffering and dying, while the other half, with their white skin, enjoyed their time on the beaches. Despite the black population being the original inhabitants of the country, they were deprived of their rights. Some white individuals decided not to remain silent about the rights of black people and formed the African Resistance Party. They aimed to awaken the people from their state of oppression and fight against racial segregation and injustice. The story follows two characters, Tim and Stephen, who have just graduated from university. They join the Resistance Party to fight against the racist government. They become responsible for manufacturing explosives and distributing pamphlets to encourage people to join the cause and revolt against the system. One day, Tim and Stephen prepare themselves and head to a densely populated area where they distribute bags of explosives everywhere. They wait for the explosions and quickly make their escape. However, on their way, they are suddenly arrested on charges of treason against the government and planting explosives in the streets. Before the trial, Tim's girlfriend arrives and gives him money to hide quickly in any place he can find. She advises him not to surrender and to hide the money well, as being caught with it would result in a 12-year prison sentence on top of the existing charges. Tim hides the money in a secret location and goes to the courtroom. There, the judge sentences him to 12 years in prison, while Stephen receives an 8-year sentence. They both enter the prison, wearing clothes that distinguish them as political prisoners, indicating that they are not a threat to others. Before they are transferred to their designated cells, Stephen attempts to escape through a window but is caught. They both undergo intense training and eventually arrive at the prison where they will serve their sentences. There, they encounter the superintendent and the other guards who are traitors to their own country and race, despite being of higher social status. On their first day in prison, Tim and Stephen wake up for breakfast and meet one of the prominent political activists in the country, named Dan, whose trial was held alongside the leader of the resistance movement. There are some prisoners sentenced to life imprisonment, and Dennis expresses his admiration for these prisoners and their courage. After talking to them, he tells them the details of the prison where they live in case they decide to escape. It tells them that the walls are 20 meters long, and that barbed wire covering the walls is designed to hold the skin directly. The lights run from sunset to dawn and light every corner of the prison. Professional guards are specially trained to shoot prisoners without hesitation. Dennis asks Stephen about the tunnels, and he knows that they also lead to prison and that every escape attempt so far has failed. Therefore, they are required not to increase their prison sentences or put their lives to death. Then he leaves them. Suddenly, another political prisoner named Leonard comes and tells them he's ready to join them if they decide to plan an escape. Days pass until they get to day 127, and that day the idea of running away comes to Dennis's mind. He decides to keep the form of his cell lock and look at it every day to draw it in his mind. He knows that opening the cell is the only way to escape, so he decides to start drawing the lock and using it as a model to make a key to the cell. He puts paper on the face of the lock and rubs it in the pen to learn the lock from it. He then wraps the paper so that the drawing begins on the face of the lock and enters it into the lock in the cell. The pencil is used to make the paper turn around the lock and draw the interior parts of the key place. One day, he decides to put the idea of making wooden keys to his friends. He tells them he intends to save the keys that guards carry so he can draw her teeth and make a similar key. They're asked to try to draw the attention of the guard as long as possible. His friends agree and start implementing the plan. Every time Dennis looks at the guard, he goes into his cell and draws the shape he's going to make. It compares different drawings so that it can finally draw the final shape of the key. In a carpentry workshop, he chooses the tools he'll need to make the key. He hides it in his coffee box and puts the wood and the tool he's going to use inside the box. He wraps them with a suspect paper over Masha, who doesn't make a sound, so no one can hear them. In addition, the box has coffee to drink. The guard empties the coffee can for each prisoner. Tim passes the inspection and his idea succeeds. He stays up all night to make the key and repeats the experiment more than once, until suddenly he finds the door of his cell open in front of him. But in his face he finds a very huge iron door opening, but from the outside. On the second day, he talks to his friends about the problem he encountered, and they think, how do they open the door from the outside? And Tom thinks that he can use a string in a game that his son made for him. But Tim says that he will not be able to control the string easily, and suddenly the guard passes them. So Tom pretends that he is sweeping, and suddenly the idea of a broom comes into Stephen's brain, which they are trying to get from the cell window to the door. Outside, they still have an idea of how the broom will control the key that will enter the door. Tim keeps thinking until he sees in the workshop a machine that resembles a sewing machine, and the wood inside it is damaged. He decides to design something similar to the broom and makes a place in which to place the key. After days of work, he is able to design a broom with a handle that rotates 360 degrees from both sides. He places the key in it and brings a mattress to which he sticks mirrors so that he can see well. He keeps trying to open the door and comes back again to fix the threads of the key until finally he succeeds in opening the outer door and is at the top of his hand. But suddenly, and unfortunately for him, the key gets stuck in the door and he does not know how. He pulls it out with the broom until he tries hard, so the key falls on the ground and sticks gum into the hand of the broom so he can get it with it. He keeps trying while he is extremely nervous until he succeeds in getting it. On the next day, he keeps expressing his help and screaming at the top of his voice, but he tries to control his nerves, telling his friends calmly that he succeeded and passed. There are days when he designs more than one key, and at the same time he practices with his friends to run the longest distance in the shortest possible time until he finishes most of the keys they will use, and then he must put them in a safe place other than his cell so that he can give them to Stephen, who is responsible for collecting the garbage.
He plants in the garden to hide it there, and the officer sees them and fights with Stephen because he entered the garden, which is not within his scope of work. Fortunately, he does not suspect them, and the days pass, and he continues his attempts to open more than one door after the outer cell door, and he is able to open 3 doors after he is confident that he has the ability. He opens any door and decides that he is gathering the rest of the political prisoners to go out with him, but the problem arises of the prison clothes they will go out in, and because of this, they must bring civilian clothes.
Tim decides to cooperate with one of the black workers who work in the prison in order to bring him the newspapers and also the civilian clothes that are given to the new arrivals when the new arrivals enter the prison. But one of the officers notices the signals that occur between the black worker and Tim, and we reach day 296 in the prison, and the responsible officer comes to Tim's cell and gives he has his new glasses, and it reminds him of the black worker who was in prison and who did not come for 2 days because he was executed on the gallows in front of his eyes. Tim is very upset and decides that he will take revenge after he gets out. At night, Tim goes out with Leonardo, and they try the keys that they have on the 4th door. They take advantage of the slow movement of the guard in charge and are able to open the 4th door as well, and then they go back and hide in a safe under the stairs, and this is until the guard goes through all the cells, and in order not to detect them, Tim and Leonardo remain, placing a doll on their bed with clothes so that no one reveals their absence and it passes. Days continue, and Tim and his friend continue to try to open all the doors in the shortest time until they reach an electric door that opens from the guard's office himself. So Tim decides that he must pretend that he is sick so that he can exit the electric gate and know how to lock the next gates and also their number. After a period of not brushing his teeth, he's finally able to leave the cell to the clinic and finds that there is only one door behind him, which is a weak wooden door. Finally, they set a time for their final escape from the prison, but suddenly, and unfortunately for them, there is a surprise inspection of all the cells, and the warden discovers Tim does not brush his teeth, and this is why he went to the clinic, so he searches his entire room until he sees a wooden piece that looks like a key. They ask Tim about using it, and Tim thinks quickly. He tells him that it is for pictures and puts a picture in it. Fortunately for him, the prison warden believes him, and after a few days the appointment comes.
It was agreed upon, and Tim, Stephen, and Leonardo try to convince the rest of the prisoners to escape, but everyone fears for their lives and decide to go. The group begins the escape process, and they all leave the cells, lock them behind them, and return through the third and fourth doors. Then they wait for the guard until he goes on guard duty and enter the warehouses. But unfortunately for them, the guard keeps moving. Needs for the warehouse, and before he approaches them, one of the prisoners breaks his lamp in order to give the group a greater opportunity, and his plan actually succeeds, and the guard comes out. The group exits quietly and leaves the rest of the doors until they open the electric door and are in front of the last gate, which will be the visits gate, but none of the keys they have with it work with it. The three of them become nervous, and Tim wants to return quickly so that they are not discovered so that they can think of another solution, but Leonardo completely refuses and is determined to. He leaves the door and continues to break the wood next to the lock. Finally, the door to freedom opens before their eyes, and they go out together to the school fence, which becomes the blind spot for the sniper above the prison. They watch him as he goes and waits for him until he looks at the other side. They send the three of them back through the prison door, which is open, and the three find themselves in the street, so they move quietly on the map they have of the city until they reach a taxi whose owner is black, and the driver feels that they chose him specifically because of the color of his skin. And they have no problem with him, and he understands that they are from the resistance, so he takes them out of the city. Finally, the three of them breathe the air of freedom after months of imprisonment, and they travel to London, where they continue their revolutions against apartheid. In South Africa, until the revolution succeeds, Nelson Mandela is appointed as the first president of African descent. Racism will end at the hands of every resistor who dies, is imprisoned, or even escapes. Thanks for watching and following.